My own mother stood in a courtroom and lied to a judge about me. My father nodded in agreement. My brother sat there with the satisfied look on his face, like he'd finally won something he'd been competing for his entire life. They were trying to bankrupt me. Not financially struggling me. Not barely making it me. They were coming after the company I'd built from nothing, the one they didn't even know existed until 2 weeks before they filed the lawsuit. The lawyer they hired was expensive. You could tell by the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he acted like the outcome was already decided. My lawyer sat next to me, eerily calm, while my family's attorney painted me as reckless, unstable, someone who owed them nearly $2 million. $2 million I never borrowed. For agreements I never signed. For a debt that never existed. Then the judge looked up from the papers and said something that made my brother's face go white. I read about this company last week. In a publication. That's when everything changed. But let me back up, because none of this makes sense without context, and honestly, even with context, it's hard to believe your own family would do this. I didn't grow up in a broken home. That's the part people always get confused about when I tell this story. My family looked perfect from the outside. The kind of family where neighbors would say, they really have it all figured out. My father ran an established financial business in Boston. He was all about structure, legacy, doing things the way they'd always been done. My mother was all about appearances. Perfect dinners, perfect smiles, perfect timing for when to cry to get what she wanted. Then there was Trevor, my older brother. The golden child. The heir to everything my father had built. Everyone just assumed he'd step into that world without question, and honestly, Trevor never questioned it either. He loved being the favorite. I was the other one. Not the rebel. I wasn't out there slamming doors and screaming about how nobody understood me. I just didn't fit. While Trevor talked about portfolios and networking dinners, I was obsessed with systems, with technology, with how things could break and how to protect them. I remember this one dinner where I tried explaining what I was working on. I was sketching ideas on a napkin while the roast got cold. My father watched for maybe a minute, then smiled at me the way you smile at a kid playing pretend. That's a phase, he said. You'll grow out of it. My mother laughed and changed the subject. Those moments piled up. Holidays where Trevor got praised for things he hadn't even finished yet. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Compliments that always came with conditions. You're smart, but you're talented, if only you'd. When I finally left to build my own life, it wasn't dramatic. No big fight, no ultimatum. Just distance. I married Ryan, took his last name, and built something quietly. Intentionally. Without announcing it to anyone who'd spent years telling me I'd fail. And it worked. Not overnight. Not easily. There were years when my entire world fit inside a cramped apartment with a laptop on a folding table. Long nights, missed events, cold coffee at 3 a.m. I learned to survive on focus and pure stubbornness. I learned how to keep going without applause. What I didn't do was tell my family. I didn't correct their assumptions. When Trevor joked that I was still figuring things out, I let him think that. When my mother asked too sweetly if I was okay financially, I said I was fine and left it there. It felt safer. Like keeping a door closed in a house where you know a storm is coming. For years, silence protected me. I didn't realize it was also giving them time to decide what they thought I deserved. By the time they figured out I'd built something real, something valuable, they weren't impressed. They were threatened. Success didn't announce itself with fireworks. It came quietly. Small confirmations I didn't share with anyone. A contract renewed without negotiation. A client who stopped asking if and started asking how soon. New people joining the team, trusting me with their careers, their livelihoods. I learned early that the less my family knew, the calmer my life stayed. So I kept my name off headlines. I avoided posting anything that showed scale or momentum. When my mother asked vague questions about what I did these days, I gave vague answers. Technology. Consulting. Busy. Nothing impressive enough to invite scrutiny. For a while, it worked. Then Trevor started calling. Not directly at first. Little messages in group chats. Comments during holidays. Heard text volatile right now. Must be stressful not having stability. Always with a smile. Always framed as concern. My father started asking questions too. Not about me specifically. About risk. About liability. About whether people like me understood consequences. I felt the shift before I understood it. The attention sharpened. My mother suddenly wanted updates. She asked if I'd considered coming back more often, reconnecting, maybe even talking to my father about opportunities. That word sat wrong in my stomach. It wasn't an invitation. It was an assessment. Then came the dinner. Nothing dramatic happened. No argument. Just an offhand comment from Trevor about hearing I'd finally landed something decent. He said it like a joke, but his eyes weren't laughing. They were searching my face, waiting for confirmation, waiting to measure how much I'd grown without him noticing. I changed the subject. That night, I told Ryan something didn't feel right. He didn't argue. He'd seen this pattern before. The way curiosity turns into entitlement when certain people realize you might have something they didn't approve of you earning. 2 weeks later, the envelope arrived. Thick. Official. My name printed too cleanly on the front. I stood in the hallway with my keys still in my hand, staring at it like it might move if I looked away. When I opened it, the words didn't register all at once. Bankruptcy petition. Creditor. Amount owed. Rounded. Confident. Precise. Trevor's name sat there like it belonged. I read it twice. 3 times. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. What I felt was colder than fear. They weren't asking questions anymore. They'd made a decision, and they were about to force me to answer it in court. I didn't cry when I finished reading. I sat down at the kitchen table and read it again, slower this time. Every line. Every number. Every confident lie wrapped in legal language. They claimed my company owed Trevor nearly $2 million. Payments I'd defaulted on. Bills I'd ignored. Agreements I'd supposedly signed years ago. The tone wasn't angry or emotional. That's what scared me. It was calm, methodical, written to sound inevitable. This wasn't a threat. It was an execution plan. I called my lawyer and told her exactly what was in front of me. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a pause on the line just long enough for me to brace myself. They're trying to force a bankruptcy process, she said finally. Not because it'll hold up. Because it creates noise. Delays. Doubt. So they know it's fake, I said. Yes. And they're counting on you reacting emotionally instead of strategically. That's when the weight of it landed. This wasn't Trevor acting alone in some moment of jealousy. This took coordination. Time. Approval. Someone had to decide this was acceptable. Someone had to nod and say, "Go ahead." I thought of my mother's careful silences. My father's belief that discipline always looked like punishment. The way they closed ranks when something threatened the story they'd built about themselves. I didn't ask if they were involved. I already knew. The next few days blurred together. I pulled records, audits, bank statements. Every clean trail I'd spent years maintaining suddenly mattered more than ever. My lawyer asked for everything. Payments, bills, correspondence. She didn't rush me. She wasn't worried. That steadiness became my anchor. This only works if we let it, she said. Truth has a way of surviving pressure. I didn't reach out to my family. Not to confront them. Not to warn them. Silence was no longer protection. It was strategy. If they wanted to paint me as reckless, I'd show up controlled. If they wanted chaos, I'd give them precision. At night, when the house was quiet, the anger tried to surface. Not the explosive kind. The kind that asks dangerous questions. How could they? Why wasn't I enough? I didn't let it take over. Because this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about making sure their lies collapsed under their own weight. And the courtroom was where that collapse would begin. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of cold that settles in your chest when every sound feels too loud and every movement feels watched. I arrived early. Not to make a statement. Just to breathe before everything collided. My lawyer sat beside me, already organized. Neat stacks of documents. Payments, bills, audited records. Calm in human form. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't need to. She knew this kind of silence. Then my family walked in. They didn't come together. They never did when things mattered. My mother entered first, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral. Trevor followed, confident, relaxed, already shaking hands with his attorney. My father came last, posture straight, eyes forward, refusing to look in my direction. No one acknowledged me. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted comfort. Because it confirmed something final. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was alignment. When the hearing began, Trevor's attorney spoke first. His voice was smooth, practiced. He described my company as unstable, overextended, poorly managed. He talked about debts and obligations, about my pattern of avoidance, about the need to protect creditors. My mother started crying on cue. Soft at first, just enough to be noticed. She dabbed her eyes, shook her head slowly like this was all breaking her heart. When she spoke, her voice cracked perfectly. We gave her every opportunity, she said. And she threw it all away. I felt something tighten in my throat. Not because the words surprised me. Because she said them like they were facts everyone already agreed on. My father nodded beside her. Just once. Small. Controlled. That nod landed harder than her words. Trevor didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, hands folded, already imagining how this would end. In his version of reality, this courtroom was final proof he'd been right all along. My lawyer didn't react. She didn't object, didn't interrupt. She waited. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. Page after page. The room held its breath. I could hear the soft hum of the lights overhead, the scrape of a chair somewhere behind me. Then something shifted. The judge stopped turning pages. He removed his glasses and set them down carefully. Too carefully. He leaned back slightly and looked up. Not at the lawyers. Not at the papers. At me. The silence stretched. My pulse hammered in my ears. I need counsel to approach the bench, he said. Both attorneys stood. Trevor's lawyer walked confidently at first. Halfway there, I saw his shoulders stiffen. My lawyer moved at the same pace she always did. Unhurried. Composed. They spoke in low voices. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the color drain from Trevor's lawyer's face. His jaw tightened. He nodded too quickly. When they returned to their seats, the judge didn't put his glasses back on. I have a question, he said, voice steady, carrying across the room. About the company at the center of this petition. Trevor finally looked up. I read about this company last week, the judge continued. Not in a filing. In a publication. My mother's crying stopped mid-breath. Trevor's eyes flicked toward his lawyer. A technology firm, the judge said slowly. Growing rapidly. Providing services at a level that caught national attention. He paused. Does that sound familiar to you, Mr. Montgomery? Trevor stood. Your Honor, with respect, the defendant is exaggerating her success. This is a small operation. I haven't finished, the judge said, cutting him off cleanly. The room felt different now. Charged. Alert. I'm looking at audited financial records, the judge continued, lifting a page. They show consistent revenue growth, significant reserves, no indication of insolvency. He turned another page. I'm also looking at payment records that do not align with the obligations claimed in this petition. Trevor's lawyer shifted in his seat. And then there's this, the judge said, holding up another document. Signature analysis. Independent. Detailed. He looked directly at Trevor. These signatures do not match the defendant's handwriting. The air went thin. My father leaned forward slightly, like he was trying to hear something better. My mother's hand froze in her lap. My lawyer stood. Your Honor, she said calmly, we are prepared to walk the court through each inconsistency. The payments referenced here do not exist. The bills cited were never issued. The alleged loan occurred during a period when the petitioner's own financial records show instability. She let that land. Furthermore, interfering with an active company through fraudulent filings carries serious implications. Trevor shot to his feet. This is ridiculous. She's twisting facts to protect herself. The judge's gaze didn't move. What concerns me, he said, is not her defense. It's your certainty. He turned a page, then another. Someone in this courtroom, he said slowly, is lying to my face. My chest loosened. Just a fraction. And based on what I'm seeing, the judge continued, it is not the defendant. My mother's eyes darted to my father. He didn't look back. Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it. I am dismissing this petition, the judge said. With prejudice. He paused, then added, this matter will also be referred for further review. My lawyer placed a hand lightly on the table. Not on me. She didn't need to. This was already done. Court officers approached Trevor and his attorney. Quiet words. Serious expressions. My family suddenly looked smaller, folded in on themselves. As we stood to leave, my mother reached for my arm. Riley, she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. We were trying to help. I looked at her hand, then at her face. No, I said quietly. You were trying to be right. I turned away before she could respond. Behind me, I heard my father say my name. I didn't stop. The courtroom doors closed with a sound that felt final. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't bracing myself for impact anymore. I was walking away from it. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It never does. It moved quietly, the way consequences usually move when there's no one left to shield them. Trevor stopped calling first. Then his lawyer did. I didn't hear details directly. Only what filtered through the edges of conversations I wasn't part of anymore. Reviews. Questions. Things being looked into. The kind of language people use when certainty has abandoned them. My parents tried a different approach. A voicemail from my mother, soft and careful, explaining how no one meant for things to go this far. A message from my father that sounded more like a closing statement than an apology. He talked about family, about reputation, about how mistakes shouldn't define someone forever. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. What they'd done wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And choices don't dissolve just because the outcome is uncomfortable. Work moved forward. Meetings resumed. Deadlines mattered again. My team showed up the way they always had. Focused. Steady. Trusting me without asking for explanations. That trust grounded me more than any verdict ever could. At home, life softened. Evenings were quieter. The constant tension I'd learned to live with finally released its grip. I slept better. Thought clearer. For the first time in a long while, my success didn't feel like something I had to defend. I didn't win by watching them fall. I won by standing still while the truth did what it always does. It held. I learned something I wish I'd known sooner. Family isn't defined by who shares your last name. It's defined by who stands beside you when the truth gets uncomfortable. Some people only love you when you're small enough to control. When you outgrow that role, they call it betrayal. The company kept growing. Not because of the courtroom drama, but in spite of it. Because the work mattered. Because the team believed in what we were building. Ryan never said I told you so, even though he'd seen this coming from miles away. He just made coffee in the mornings and listened when I needed to process what had happened. That's what real support looks like. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just present. Sometimes I think about that moment in the courtroom when the judge looked up and said he'd read about my company. The shock on Trevor's face. The way my mother's performance just stopped mid-breath. They built their entire case on the assumption that I was still the person they remembered. The one who didn't fit. The one who'd never amount to much. They forgot that people grow. That silence doesn't mean failure. That distance sometimes means you're building something they can't touch. I don't hate them. That's the strange part. I don't wish them harm. But I also don't owe them access to my life anymore. They made their choice. I'm making mine. Thanks for listening, and if you liked this story, share it with others, and don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when the people who should support you try to tear you down instead. The truth doesn't need a defense. It just needs time to reveal itself.